Welcome to episode 16 of Fixing America with J. Mill. This episode is entitled, Where is Bureaucracy on Our List of Things to Fix? We have been discussing the popular sovereignty tenet of a liberal democracy and how we know when we are in power. We have discussed the ways the Trump administration has used and abused his executive power through various federal agencies of our bureaucracy to expand his powers over those agencies to control our lives. Before we proceed further into that subject, I think it might be helpful to take a closer look at the bureaucracy, its history, and its organizational structure. Historians agree that the United States bureaucracy began with George Washington and the creation of his cabinet. It consisted of 4 departments: War, State, Treasury, and an Attorney General. Originally, Congress had the primary and most direct oversight role. It could create committees that could conduct investigations and hold hearings. It had budgetary control and could legislatively change an agency's mandate, structure, or powers. In many instances, it had senatorial confirmation powers over its leadership. Initially, the executive branch, via the president, could make appointments of agency heads and later inspector generals, and he could make executive orders and directives to guide agency policy. The judicial branch could judicially review the agency's actions to ensure compliance with statutory authority and constitutional limits. In short, oversight of federal agencies began as a shared responsibility among all 3 branches of our government, with each branch exercising power consistent with the separation of powers mandate and our checks and balances system of governance. During the founding era, 1789 to 1828 of our country, a period of 39 years, the shared responsibility of oversight did not change. The landmark Supreme Court decision of Marbury versus Madison in 1803 confirmed the authority of the judicial branch to review and invalidate acts of Congress or executive actions that violated the Constitution. The Post Office, authorized by Article 1, Section 8, Clause 7 of the U.S. Constitution, was established by the Post Office Act of 1792. It has been recognized as a cabinet-level department since 1872. A Postmaster General appointed by the President would lead the agency. It did not become an independent agency within the executive branch until the passage of the Postal Reorganization Act of 1970. In 1802, the federal government had 3,905 employees. By 1829, it had expanded to 10,415. The bureaucracy's problems began with the election of Andrew Jackson as president in 1829. His presidency marked the beginning of the spoils system era, 1828 to 1883. Although Jackson is sometimes wrongfully blamed for creating the bureaucracy, that is not true. As explained earlier, it started with George Washington, but Andrew Jackson is largely credited with giving the bureaucracy its shameful name and reputation as the spoils system. He is also responsible for signing the infamous Indian Removal Act of 1830 that led to the Trail of Tears March in 1838, often referred to as an ethnic cleansing, and his expansion of presidential executive powers. But his infamy is no less earned for his prolific practice of cronyism and nepotism in his political appointments that led to widespread corruption during his administration. There are many parallels between his conduct and Trump's. Jackson's entire administration is notable for his practice of rewarding loyalists, seeking political retribution against his opponents and critics, and placing incompetent and unqualified individuals in government roles, which created a culture of patronage that continued for decades after he left office. But Jackson's corrosive effect on our bureaucracy is perhaps best illustrated by a discussion of the bank wars and panic of 1837. Prior to 1829, bank and corporation oversight was left to the states. The process of getting a charter was highly politicized and often involved intense lobbying, bribery, and political maneuvering. The laws could vary greatly between states. It was highly decentralized, and there were two charter exceptions. Between 1789 and 1791, the United States had no central bank or a uniform currency. The creation and supervision of banks and corporations was left up to the states. Most, if not all, states had paper currency, but gold or silver in specie was preferred because the paper currency fluctuated in value, frequently downward. Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary, helped Congress establish the first central bank in 1791. When its charter expired, a second Bank of the United States was formed by Congress with a 20-year charter. It was authorized to act as the government's fiscal agent, manage federal funds, issue currency, and regulate state banks and the money supply. Hamilton's objective was to create a stable national currency, a central institution to manage federal reserves and debts, and a means to restore public confidence in the nation's finances. Andrew Jackson opposed that concept and was intent on destroying the central bank as part of his agenda. In 1832, Senator Henry Clay and the bank president Nicholas Biddle pushed a bill through Congress to renew the bank's charter prematurely for 4 years in hopes that President Jackson would either sign it or, if he vetoed it, they could use it against him in the 1832 presidential election. President Jackson vetoed the bill, alleging it was unconstitutional, notwithstanding the Supreme Court's decision in McCulloch versus Maryland in 1819 to the contrary. Congress did not override the veto, but Henry Clay's strategy failed, and Jackson was reelected to a second term in office. Jackson, alleging his reelection was a mandate to destroy the bank, had his Treasury Secretary, Roger Taney, remove federal funds from the bank and deposit them in his designated pet banks, often based on political loyalty rather than expertise or merit, and thus effectively decentralize the central banking system. Jackson's action was considered unconstitutional by many people. He was formally censured for his actions by the United States Senate. The state's receipt of the funds led to a credit boom that precipitated the state banks to issue more paper money and make loans. The president of the U.S. Bank retaliated by tightening credit. Jackson, intending to curb speculation, ordered payment for public land must be in gold or silver, specie, not paper money, causing a run on the state banks for gold and silver. In May 1837, New York banks suspended specie payments. Land sales and businesses collapsed, unemployment soared, and the economy entered a deep depression that lasted roughly until 1843. The spoils system continued and expanded after Jackson. His successor, Martin Van Buren, a Jackson ally, was the architect of the spoils system in New York state politics. Thereafter, the spoils system continued with subsequent presidents of both political parties and led to increasing corruption and inefficiency as loyalty to political parties grew. A movement to reform the system began but developed very slowly. The spoils system finally ended, sort of, with the passage of the Pendleton Act in 1883. It was sparked in 1883 when Charles J. Guiteau assassinated James A. Garfield as revenge for President Garfield denying him a promised consulship as a political favor. It marked a shift away from the spoils system by mandating a merit-based hiring, competitive examinations, and it prohibited political firings and demotions. It created the United States Civil Service Commission to administer the civil service examinations. The Pendleton Act helped greatly, but did not completely solve the problem because it protected employees for a specific term of years, often 4 years. Thereafter, the president could replace them along party lines. In practice, the act moved patronage power from the president to the Bureau of Chiefs, who oversaw hiring for the remaining exempt positions. But it helped. Perhaps the solution is a broad prohibition against politics in the workplace. What Andrew Jackson did during his 2 terms as president is precisely what Donald Trump is doing today. Like Jackson, Donald Trump is rewarding loyalists, seeking political retribution against his opponents, placing incompetent and unqualified individuals in government roles. Based on the history of the spoils system era, we know, or should know, a political system that allows a president to replace federal employees with his loyal supporters regardless of merit or qualifications, and who seeks retribution against his opponents will, at a minimum, lead to widespread corruption, inefficiency, incompetency, and favoritism in government. And in the case of Jackson's administration, to a deep depression that lasted some 6 years. There is another similarity. Jackson, like Trump, was an arrogant bully president who ignored the rule of law when it pleased him. In particular, he ignored the Supreme Court's decision that the creation of the central bank was constitutional in McCulloch versus Maryland. He again ignored the rule of law when he unilaterally set out to destroy the bank by withdrawing its funds and depositing them with his pet banks. That conduct, along with his order to restrict payment of land in specie, led to a deep depression. Ironically, his stance against nullification of Supreme Court law by the states played a role in keeping the states united. But his belief that his reelection was a mandate for him to destroy what had been legislatively created made his political agenda superior to the rule of law, set dangerous precedent that we must learn from today. These are all things Trump has and is doing now. What is different today, however, is that Trump's plan goes further than Jackson's. Trump's plan is to use loyalists that he put in federal agency to manipulate the government, but to help him complete his plan to replace our democracy with fascism, with him as the dictator. He has boasted about the loyalty litmus test for his appointees. He has nominated lawyers to top positions with the DOJ who have never practiced trial law or tried a case in court. And in many cases, the Congress, which Trump controls with his Twitter account, has used its majority status to confirm such appointments. This peek back at history shows us the result we can expect. And, lest I forget, that is why our enlightened citizenry must be taught history. The next era in the evolution of the United States bureaucracy is known as the Civil Service Reform Era, 1883 to 1930. After passage of the Pendleton Act, Congress began using investigative committees more actively and passed the Comptroller General Act in 1921, which established the General Accounting Office, that's the GAO, and the Office of the Comptroller General to provide Congress with an independent agency to oversee federal spending. It also mandated that the President submit an annual budget to Congress. It transferred auditing responsibilities from the Treasury Department to the new GAO, giving it broad authority to investigate how federal money is spent and to report its findings to Congress and the President. The civil service reforms also caused major changes in campaign finance. Thereafter, parties began focusing on wealthy donors for campaign funds rather than political appointees. The foregoing overview of the civil service reform era, while accurate, does not give an adequate flavor nor teach the lessons we should learn from that very eventful era in our history. During that era, we fought in a world war, blasted through an economic boom known as the Roaring Twenties, experienced the crash of our stock market, and suffered a devastating depression accompanied by a horrible dust bowl across 4 states that prompted John Steinbeck's Pulitzer-winning novel, The Grapes of Wrath. We don't have time to discuss them in this episode, but they will be topics for subsequent episodes. By way of preview, history will show our country moving away from a tradition of laissez-faire economics toward a more active and interventionist government. It should be exciting. I hope you will tune in to my next episode. Please subscribe to my podcast so you can automatically receive new episodes as they are released. Thanks for listening. Hope to see you for the next episode. Don't forget to hit the like button, leave your comments, and subscribe. Thanks, resist, and be safe.